talked about the Great Commission, but this is the Great Commandment. To love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your strength, and all your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And this is a fundamental principle behind the founding of the University of St. Catherine. That fundamentally, although we did have the blessing of Metropolitan Philip of thrice blessed memory, we did have the blessing to undertake this effort from Bishop, now Metropolitan Joseph. At the end of the day, I and our staff and our faculty and our students should be led by Christ. And this is what allows us to say that we are an institution that focuses on our hearts, our souls, our strength, and our mind. The life of the mind is a no-brainer, no pun intended, for an academic institution. But what does it mean to be an educated person? That's becoming harder and harder to identify in the United States. What is a bachelor's degree? Is it degree creep or credential creep that's really behind this inability of folks to get a job with a baccalaureate? They now need a master's degree or a doctorate degree. Your strength. We have vibrant athletic programs at St. Catherine. You can demonstrate your love of the Lord by discipline of your body, by performance, and by demonstration of your strength. And then your heart and your soul and your spiritual life should be, again, at the core of an Orthodox Christian institution. The other principle that's not on here, and this is typically what you can come across in small organizations that achieve great things in a very short period of time, is this concept of force multiplicity or force multiplication. Force multipliers are people. Has anyone heard of that term? It comes from the Navy SEALs and Special Forces, where the idea is that folks are trained, individual soldiers who are participating in these elite teams are trained so that they are a force that is magnified or multiplied beyond their number. So that if you have a unit of 17 men and women going into a battle, the force that's felt by the opponent is that of 150 men and women. So 1 + 1 equals not 3, but 1 + 1 equals 15. So a key to our organization and the key to the success that I'll share with you is because we have on our staff force multipliers. People who take on multiple hats, multiple challenges, do so month after month, year after year without burning out. And that's because they love the mission of the institution and what we're trying to achieve. So it all began with St. Catherine. And if you don't know the story of St. Catherine, let me briefly tell it. St. Catherine was martyred just before Christianity became legal in the Roman Empire. It was around 313. From what we know, she was a young woman who came from a family of privilege, was very erudite, very bright, and she loved the Lord. She loved the Lord so much that folks in Alexandria in Egypt started to become Christians because of her witness. The emperor, Maxentius, the Caesar of the time, and if you remember, there were 4 Caesars at any one time in the Roman Empire, but that Caesar got tired of this young woman, got tired of Christians, thought that this was sedition and that this woman would have to be dealt with. So he set up a debate between her and whatever the number is, 40 pagan scholars or 30 pagan scholars, and they openly debated Christology, basically. Who is Christ? And he wanted her to do that in a public way in order to shame her, humiliate her, and shame and humiliate the people that had become Christians as a result of her witness. Well, she won the day, as the story goes. She was imprisoned. While she was in prison, the court of the king, the wife, the Caesar's wife, would visit her. They all became Christians. The pagan scholars that had been set up to debate St. Catherine were also imprisoned because they had lost the debate. They all became Christians. So this word gets back to Maxentius, and it's like, who is this woman? And we've got to get rid of her. So as he would, he publicly wanted to not only humiliate her, but also torture her. And so in the iconography of St. Catherine, she's always portrayed as a younger woman. Books are here. There's medical instruments because she had trained in medicine as well. and other arts that she had formal and informal training with. But what's the most dramatic is the St. Catherine wheel. And this wheel has sort of these spikes or knives around it. And the idea was that this thing would spin, they would throw the saint up against her publicly, let the wheel just shred her body to pieces and just prove what a meaningless, inconsequential person she was. Well, as you know, they tried this, the wheel exploded. Eventually they had to behead St. Catherine. St. Catherine became known as the scholar saint. There's a St. Catherine College at Oxford, there's a St. Catherine College at Cambridge, and she's widely known throughout the Christian world as being a person who mastered persuasive argument on behalf of the Lord. And she was so good at it. And who better than her would you want your students to emulate? Father Peter Gilchrist, of also blessed memory, cornered me one day and said, "Hey Frank, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, what do you mean, Father Peter?" He said, "Well, why are you naming the school after a female saint?" I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, no one's going to come." I said, "Well, why not?" "Well, because they want to go to St. Paul, or they want to go to St. George, or they want to go to a male name." I paused and I said, "Father, Notre Dame?" I never heard that argument again. So St. Catherine is our patronal saint, and she is the focus of life at St. Catherine. Her feast is the 25th of November, and I met her when I was a boy. I was at a Greek Orthodox church of the Assumption in Chicago, where the chapel downstairs was named after her. And so I've had her with me for a long, long time, and it made all the sense in the world to name the university after her. So in brief, our mission at the university is to provide a balanced education in the liberal arts and sciences, founded and rooted in our faith. And the motto that we use is inquiry seeking wisdom. Now, as you know, liberal arts and sciences, the word liberal here isn't a political term, right? It's liberal that connotes education that allows people to become free men and free women. This is in contrast to vocational training, or in contrast to servile training, if you will, the inverse of liberal. It's not a political term. So the liberal arts and sciences, if you study the history of these fields, go back to Latin times and Latin universities. For those of you who are familiar with education, the trivium, the quadrivium, classical subjects like rhetoric, composition, geometry, music, and so forth, they've been around forever, and they've been ways that we've educated our youth to continue in this tradition of the West. Inquiry-seeking wisdom is defined in a way that I wanted to call out, again, my career. In my career, inquiry is a key word that we as scientists are trained, equipped, and charged with the idea that we are to inquire. We are to learn about the universe. We are to measure physical phenomena, biological phenomena. That's what scientists do. We inquire. But after having a very successful career, I was a full tenured professor at UCSD, at the top of the hill, so to speak, I realized, and I had realized all along the way, that just asking why, just inquiring, wasn't much. It wasn't enough. Why do butterflies have wings? That's what my colleagues were thinking about, and I thought there were bigger questions than this. And so for me, when I put these words together, wisdom is the Lord, Hagia Sophia, holy wisdom. So if you can take an academic training, an academic education, teach students to inquire after Christ, there is something amazing that can happen at an institution like this. I also thought that founding an institution based simply on our Orthodox identity would not be enough, that we would have a very limited student pool, and my idea was to grow it to a much larger institution. If you look at our seal, we embody those ideals, hopefully you'll agree, that I just expressed. Inquiry-seeking wisdom, the university, the cross, the idea of a circle, which emphasizes the idea of community, that we are coming together as a Christian community that is inclusive and that is holistic. Certainly Holy Scripture is at the core of what we believe. The kingdom of God, both in its current manifestation here on earth, and the kingdom as its eternal manifestation is what we're seeking. The Chi Rho, or ancient Greek symbol, the first two letters of the word Christ, to signify the ancient identity of the university. And then finally, ready for scandal? I call this the pizza. But it's not a pizza, it's the St. Catherine wheel. So the St. Catherine wheel is hard to see when it's little, but it looks like a pizza with slices across it, which brings us back to the patronal saint of the university. So I tell our students, our faculty and staff, if you forget everything about the university and you have no clue who we are, just look at our seal, and it tells you the entire story of the University of St. Catherine. So you've heard, I think you heard from Hank most recently, but you've heard from other speakers that the world, and as you know it, is rapidly changing. And here are the data regarding faith. It doesn't show up very well, but by the year 2070, the Pew Research folks project that the number of adherents to Islam is going to be comparable to the number of Christians around the world. So 2070 is not very far off. It'll be after I'm gone, but my kids will still be alive. And it's amazing to note that the influence of non-Christian groups, particularly Islam in the United States, is growing at an amazing rate. And it's not only growing population-wise, it's growing in the integration into our culture, and very smartly, integration into our educational system. When we became accredited, when USK became accredited, the first Muslim college in the United States became accredited. There are 4 Muslim colleges and universities in the process of becoming accredited. And so it's a very, I mean, good for them, right? But we have to know that this is happening. And so whatever Christian college or university you support, please don't stop, because there is a cultural paradigm shift that is occurring, and it's happening right beneath us, starting with education. Education is a big enough mess as it is, but when we start to accredit and approve institutions whose mission is counter to our civilization, and I don't mean to be political, but counter to our faith, we have to be aware of this, and we have to keep a close check. So who are we as Orthodox? Again, you heard this from others. We've been around in the United States for over 250 years. And unlike our other ancestors, or our friends' ancestors, when our ancestors came to the United States, they built churches, but they didn't build colleges and universities. The Catholic college and university network is famous, right? Notre Dame, Georgetown, smaller institutions, Steubenville, very strong Catholic identities. The Protestant, especially the evangelical schools, Wheaton, Gordon, you can go on and on and on. They've been around now for over 150 years. So when it was time for me to look for a college when I was 17 years old, it's about 90 years ago, I started to look around to figure out where I was going to go to school. And I was a good student, and I knew I wanted to on to become a physician. I knew I wanted to be a scientist, and I wanted to go to a good school. So born and raised in Chicago, I had buddies who were Catholic who wanted to go to Notre Dame. We played football together. Their dream was, I'm going to go to Notre Dame. My Protestant buddies had Wheaton, down the road, great evangelical school. My Jewish buddies had Brandeis in Boston. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to an Orthodox school. Well, there wasn't one. And that's when the seed was planted. There was Hellenic Holy Cross. I didn't feel a call to the ministry. I wasn't interested in an ecclesiastical institution because that wasn't my path. And so there was no other school. And that's when the seed was planted in my heart almost 50 years ago. And that's what I started from, that thread that has captivated and captured me my whole life, that I prayed to the Lord one day if I could do something about this, that I would. I also secretly prayed that in the course of 50 years, my church would be building colleges and universities, and I wouldn't have to do it myself. That prayer was not answered. The other prayer was, and so off we went, having, after all of this, to decide to actually go ahead and build a university. Now, the most recent institutions of higher education in the United States were organized, including this institution, in the 1930s, 1937, 1938. We have, I believe, 3 or 4 accredited seminaries. Again, no liberal arts colleges, no universities. And so when I spoke to folks and I got ideas about how to approach this, universally the feedback I got was, let's build a small college, let's make it all Orthodox kids, let's have it be very, very academically rigorous, and let's recreate what I call the seminary model. I don't know how many kids are here. Father Chad, you're probably, what, around 80 kids, 90 students? 96. So that's what a seminary does. I didn't want to reproduce that, and forgive me if I sound arrogant or anything, but I wanted to build a university. And that's 5,000 students, right? That's a very different model. That's a very different scale. Folks started teasing me about building an Orthodox Notre Dame. And they said, maybe you could do something like that. It's never been done, right? But we had to decide early on which approach to take. And so all of the decisions that have come since then have been with the idea that we're not following a seminary scale model, we're following a university scale model. And people look at you with bewilderment, and they ask questions that can only be answered by a seminary style model, because we've never had a university. There's no rubric. There's no series of steps to follow to organize an Orthodox university. So we're doing that, but it's very, very hard, right? Because there's a lot of critics out there. There's a lot of folks who know how to do this better than you, and they will let you know. But you can't do it unless you try, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to do it the best that we can. So for us, these are three critical organizations. GuideStar, if you don't know, is a database that reports on all of the institutions in the United States that have 501c3 nonprofit status. And so you can look up the institution or the organization and decide for yourself whether they're transparent and accountable enough for you to make a donation. We're graded a platinum, which is the highest level of accountability and transparency. And that was important to us. Charles may know better, but I don't think there's any other Orthodox organization that has platinum standing right now. I know some have gold standing, which is the next one below it. But we wanted to be absolutely sure for benefactors, for students, for people who worked for us, that we did everything we could to reach that standard. We are a strong athletic school. If you follow athletics, we're a tiny school, so the NAIA is what we aspire to. We're currently in the National Christian College Athletic Association. 5 years ago, for the first time in American history, an Orthodox University played a baseball game. I mean, these are mind-blowing statistics, right? It just happened 5 years ago, so you haven't missed anything. We came 2 games away from winning the World Series in baseball, so pretty good Orthodox University baseball team. But our biggest challenge was regional accreditation, or accreditation as it's widely known. WASC is our accreditor. It is the most onerous of the 6 regional accreditors. From the get-go, I did not want to found a university that would not be accredited. So this was a very serious undertaking for us. The process of accreditation for WASC takes between 8.5 and 10 years. Takes between 8.5 and 10 years, which during that period of time, your students cannot receive Title IV federal student loans. They can't receive any financial aid. So the institution has to come up with ways to cover the costs. And it's, talk about a negative and a way to discourage new institutions from being organized. This is fundamentally why. So for WASC, there are 3 steps in the accreditation cycle. The first step is something called eligibility, or eligibility status. And if you're educators, these words are familiar to you. Eligibility basically means that you as an institution comes to WASC having killed multiple trees, spent countless hours in committees, organizing your curriculum, organizing everything that goes into starting a university. And you come to them and you say, here we are, we want to begin this process of accreditation. And they can say yes or no. They can allow you to begin the process, or they can say you're not eligible. The next step after eligibility is a stage called candidacy, and that typically takes 4 to 5 years to achieve. Candidacy is where the accreditor says, you're getting there, but we need more time with you, and we want to be sure you really know what you're doing. Another 4 or 5 years pass, And if everything goes well, you are accredited. So 4 to 5 years from eligibility to candidacy, 4 to 5 years, poor Father Chad, you've gone through this so many times. Another 4 to 5 years to go from candidacy to accreditation. So that's where we were looking ahead to. When we met with our WASC visit committee for the purpose of eligibility, we were told that it would take about 6 months before we would hear whether or not we were eligible. We were optimistic. We said, we want to do this. We're going to commit to this, all the mental damage and everything that's going to go with it, but we want to be accredited. So instead of 6 months, within 45 minutes of the site visit, we got a call from WASC saying, you've been granted eligibility. 45 minutes. So it gets better. So the crazy physician scientist, Charles, says, wait a minute, we know what we're doing, right? We know what we're doing. So I get on a plane and I fly to Alameda, where WASC is based, and I sit down with the vice president, who is in charge of our case, and I present St. Catherine. And I present that we're truly a liberal arts and sciences institution, keeping in the American tradition of what that means, and can we accelerate the process? We don't want to wait 8.5 years. UC Merced had taken 9 years. The University of California, Merced, 9 years. So he said, well, what are you proposing? I said, well, can we be evaluated for accreditation? And he looked at me and he said, you know, if we do this and you fail, you're not coming back for a long time, right? So what I was proposing was short-circuiting the 8.5-year process. And glory be to God, he opens up his Rolodex, or his cell phone, and says, you know, we have to schedule these things 6 months, because we had to schedule a site visit, 6 months, a year in advance. And I'm like praying, please, please. So the VP from WASC says, but we do have an opening in November for a site visit. So this is 6 months from this meeting. And you're going to have your report into us by August, which is 4 months from the meeting. I said, we can do it. He said, you really think you can do this? And I said, yeah. So he goes, okay, you are on the schedule for a site visit to determine whether or not you're going to get your accreditation in November. So I go back to San Diego, I tell the team, they're ready to kill me, right? They're like, what have you done, right? Because if we miss this, it's over for 4 or 5 years. So we pray, we put our heads together, the idea of force multipliers kicks in, we put the report in, they come in November, in February, the commission meets, and we receive initial accreditation after 1 year, becoming the shortest school ever accredited in WASC history. So instead of, I shared the story with Father John Braun, and Father John said, there are miracles and there are big M miracles. This is a big M miracle because it had to be the Lord. We went from eligibility to initial accreditation in 1 year instead of 8.5. So that tells the world, we kind of know what we're doing, right? And why is that, people will ask. And I tell them that it's, again, because of a classical curriculum. We have what we call an integrated core. The integrated core is a compilation of history, philosophy, logic, rhetoric, composition, all of those classic ideas folded into an 8-semester time-based curriculum. So the students start off with a course on interdisciplinary learning. They then go to 6 semesters of subject matter, starting with the ancient philosophers, working through the French Revolution, onto a class called the American Experiment, and then they write their thesis. During that period of time, they are learning the great ideas that all of us, sorry, I've got a bug, that all of us have learned, and they're all required to take this integrated core. We also require every student to take 1 year of science at the college level, 1 year of mathematics at the college level, a foreign language requirement, which is typically 3 semesters, and we include American Sign Language as an option for them. We require a semester of Orthodox Christian theology and a semester of New Testament taught by none other than Father Josiah. Where is he? There he is. So we have the caliber of a Father Josiah in San Diego, and we can do this sort of thing. Now, these kids aren't all Orthodox, right? And they're many cases barely even know the basics of Christianity. So this is a big transition for them. It's a big transition for them to go an Orthodox chapel. We have 2 chapels a week. We have the Orthodox Christian Fellowship on campus. We have the Fellowship of Christian Athletes on campus. And so we are infusing them by walking the talk, by instructing them along the lines of our Orthodox Christian faith. Some of the students have become Orthodox. It wasn't our intent. We tell them to stay with their faith tradition. We want them to become closer and to have a truer walk with the Lord. It's not our intention to proselytize, but naturally that has happened. And so that solid curriculum, our solid identity as a spiritual organization, I think are what carried the day with WASC and got us through so quickly. Now, who are the Orthodox? Because we thought they were going to be our audience. And I'm sorry this doesn't come out very well, but this is Pew Research, and it's views about abortion among Orthodox Christians. And the majority are okay with it, which kind of surprised me because that wasn't my generation. The other part that was discouraging was views on homosexuality, and I don't want to politicize an issue, but the majority of Orthodox who were surveyed by Pew are okay with it as well. Now, if you're trying to build an Orthodox Christian institution and your constituency is made up of folks who have those ideas, it's pretty hard to recruit them to your university because those aren't the ideas that we espouse, or those aren't the ideas that we convey. Now, a lot of folks in the Orthodox world have both college and higher education degrees, so you would think that they would seek out this opportunity for their children. We had a great conversation at our table about why we're not getting more Orthodox Christian kids to come to St. Catherine. And I think the gist of it, and correct me, colleagues, if I'm wrong, is they don't know enough about us, and they are interested in sending their kids to the strongest possible school. So if Johnny can get into Yale or Princeton or Harvard, that's where Johnny's going to go. If Annie can get into Caltech or MIT, that's where they're going to go. St. Catherine, the Orthodox identity, the fellowship, the community, what we're aspiring to is not enough to carry the day. And so that's why we need things like our integrated core. That's why we need attention from the outside world that reinforces what we're doing, and that's why we need time. And I think that with time, folks will begin to get it. But in the interim, this is what a typical class looks like. People of different races, different backgrounds, different faiths, and the attitude here is we put a lot of effort and a lot of work into creating a university for the Orthodox community. For 50 years, I heard from friends, parishioners, and so forth, why don't we have an Orthodox university? Why don't we have an Orthodox system of higher learning? Well, we created one, and it's an amazing one, and they're not coming. And so, like there are many parables in Scripture, and there are several wedding parables, I took my cue from the idea of the invitation to the wedding feast, where the friends are called, right? Those are our Orthodox friends. We call them to the wedding feast. Look what we've prepared for you. And they say, no, I got married, I've got an ox or a cow or something. You know, my house is falling apart. They're excuses. And so what does the parable say? What does the Lord say? Open the doors. Let everyone in. And that's what we've done. We've let everyone in who appreciates what we're doing. There are the critics who say, well, you know, all the students have to be Orthodox. I'm like, no, they don't. We're not a seminary. Even a seminary, all the students aren't Orthodox. So we opened our doors, and we started with 11 students. We're now at almost 250 students in a very saturated higher education marketplace, in a very expensive part of the country. What do you do? And this is putting my business hat on. When you're a tiny organization, you make friends. So Point Loma Nazarene, the University of San Diego, our students can go to Point Loma Nazarene and complete their master's in kinesiology without having to take the GRE or any entrance exams. If they want to be teachers and they want to earn their public school teaching credential, they go to the University of San Diego. They're automatically accepted from USK into USD. So these are strategic partnerships. When I met with Point Loma, the president of Point Loma, he said, bring your cabinet and we will meet with all of you. I said, really? So we went to Point Loma, another denomination, the Nazarenes. There are about 400 or 500,000 of them. They understand what small means. They understand that you need help. And the cabinet of Point Loma met with the cabinet of tiny little USK. We've become so close that they call St. Catherine their little sister. And so you go where your friends are. The same with the University of San Diego. We have an amazing partnership with the Lake Erie College of Medicine in Lake Erie, Pennsylvania, where students who want to go to medical school can get accepted into medical school while they're still at St. Catherine. As freshmen or sophomores, they get a seat in medical school, and they're guaranteed a spot in dental school and in pharmacy school as well. For PAs, we have the same program with the University of St. Augustine, and then Southern California University of Health Sciences for students who want to get their doctorate in chiropractic medicine. UCSD is turning out to be a huge partner for us. We have co-branded certificates with them in engineering, which is a preface to building our engineering school, which means that a student can take certificate courses online through UCSD. Those certificates are co-branded with our logo and UCSD's logo. If you don't know San Diego, this is the premier institution in town. They're probably one of the top 10 public universities in the country. So to have them partner with us is yet another sort of seal of approval where we don't have to go out and beat our chests. All of these organizations are really doing it for us. So all that to say that even though we're only 7 years old, we hope the Orthodox community can take pride in having an organization like this, because it's taken a lot of work, the Lord has led us, and we're just going to continue growing. I'm going to finish with this, and you can read it, or I can kind of give you the gist of it. There's actually a couple of these quotes, and I like using quotes. This one's from the National Review. This is the John Pope Center. The other ones were from other organizations that look at educational policy. There's a group called ACTA. It's the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. ACTA is a Washington, D.C. based policy group, educational policy group. And what they do every year is they take the curricula of 1,300 colleges and universities in the United States, and they dig into those curricula, asking the question, what will they learn? They want to know if students are actually learning what you and I think of goes into preparing an educated person, an educated mind, a civilized person that can be part of a democratic order. And they ask, do they take economics? Do they take rhetoric, composition, foreign languages, and so forth? And ACTA then gives all 1,300 schools a letter grade, an A, B, C, D, F. USK is one of only 23 in the nation that have an A grade. The phone started to ring off the thing when that happened, right? Because again, we're 7 years old. This happened when we were 5. So again, just to emphasize, we have a group of great folks. Please encourage your kids and folks in your community to join us. Sorry, unabashed plug. But this is, as I said in the beginning, and I started out at the University of Chicago, and to have St. Catherine in the same sentence with a place like that, or with Columbia, tells you just how far we've come. But it's the culmination of all of these years of a thread going through my life. It's the sacrifice of someone who is doing very well in the secular world that just set it aside. And everyone here can do the same thing. And many of you are doing this. And I think that those sacrifices and those decisions in your life, I can tell you from my experience, whether USK fails or succeeds, I've met some wonderful people. I've met extraordinary students. You're doing it for the students. And if your heart's in the right place, you can continue to plug on. And so please keep us in your prayers, and I'm happy to answer any questions.